Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cleaver, Fulton, Rankin's manufacturing webinar on the opportunities post-protocol for manufacturers. My name is Aaron Moore. I'm a director in the firm and I head up the manufacturing team. For those of you who may not know us well, Cleaver, Fulton, Rankin is a commercial law firm in Belfast, providing a full legal service to both commercial and individual private clients. Our team of expert manufacturing solicitors understand the numerous issues and challenges faced by the industry and work collaboratively across the firm to provide a full service to our clients. We strive to add real value and provide proactive solutions. I must say I'm delighted to host this webinar today along with my colleague Hilary Griffith and to be joined by two real experts in their respective fields, Professor David Phinnemore of Queen's University in Belfast and Stephen Kelly from Manufacturing NI. The landscape for the manufacturing sector is ever-changing. Brexit continues to dominate discussions. During this session, we hope to move beyond the politics and issues of Brexit to provide a practical focus for businesses affected by the Northern Ireland Protocol. We hope that you leave with a better understanding of the current environment, the implications, hopefully some potential opportunities of the protocol, and the strategies that you might employ to help your business adjust. So without further ado, let's get started with some introductions. Commencing today's webinar is Professor David Phinnemore. David is a Professor of European Politics at Queen's University in Belfast. He teaches and researches the politics of the EU and has published widely on EU treaty reform, EU enlargement, EU external relations, Brexit and Northern Ireland, and he's currently coordinating a 3-year ESRC-funded research project on the governance for a place between the multi-level dynamics of implementing the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. I'm also delighted to be joined by Stephen Kelly. Stephen, as I'm sure you all know, is the CEO of Manufacturing NI. Manufacturing NI represent manufacturing businesses from SMEs to major international corporations across Northern Ireland. Working with government and partners, they focus on the cost of doing business, including industrial rating, energy, taxation, employment law, and skills. And then concluding today's session is Hilary Griffith. Hilary's a director in the corporate and commercial team and has extensive experience in all types of corporate finance, transactional and commercial work. This includes mergers and acquisitions, private equity and venture capital investment, corporate governance, reorganizations and restructurings, joint ventures and collaborations and commercial contracts. She's also a valued member of the firm's Brexit team and regularly advises manufacturing clients on a range of Brexit-related issues, such as company structures, reorganizations, commercial contracts, and innovation schemes. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining today. Before I hand over to Professor Phinnemore to commence our session, I just need to cover some basic housekeeping to ensure that you can interact with the panel. If you have any questions during the sessions, please do type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel, and we're hoping to have about 15 minutes at the end of the session for questions. We have asked you to turn your cameras off today. This is so that we can record the session to share the video with you and with others afterwards, so only our speakers will be seen if your cameras are off. So I'll now hand over to David. Thanks, David.
Okay. Thanks very much, Aaron, and thanks for the invitation to coming along today. I'm going to run through a number of slides with you, and the purpose of which is to basically set the scene as to where we are with the protocol, with the implementation of the withdrawal agreement, and look at some of the challenges that everybody is facing. So, okay, hopefully we can see that. As I said, so I want to talk through a bit of an overview of what the protocol entails for Northern Ireland, look at some of the politics around the implementation, some of the challenges that businesses and others are facing, and then try and sort of map a way ahead in terms of what some of the issues are coming up, which people need to be aware of, and also hint at some of the potential solutions that might be around. Okay, so if we think about where we are with Brexit, I'd say we've moved from what we might refer to as a phony Brexit, the transition period which ended last year, into very much real Brexit. So if you think back to January last year, the UK formally left the EU, but it remained in the EU customs union, in the EU's internal market. So very, very little changed, particularly in terms of the way in which the UK traded with the EU and Northern Ireland's position within that relationship. That period of phony Brexit came to an end on the 31st of December last year, when the UK formally left the EU's customs union, left its internal market. And that phony Brexit was replaced with the introduction of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which the UK and the EU had concluded immediately before Christmas last year, and also the full entry into force of the Protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland. Okay, so the trading relationship shifted from one in which the UK was part of the customs union, part of the internal market, the EU, to a situation where from the 1st of January this year, the UK trading relationship is one of zero tariff, zero quota in terms of goods, but there is the return of non-tariff barriers to trade, and there is no free movement of goods, of services, people, or capital. Okay, so people often refer to the Trade and Cooperation Agreement being quite thin. It doesn't provide anywhere near the sort of substantive relationship which the UK has had as a member of the EU with the other member states. Okay, within that, though, or on top of that rather, we've got the protocol, which I'm sure we're all aware creates a particularly unique position for Northern Ireland, insofar as although it is outside the internal market, it is de facto in the EU's internal market for goods. Okay, so we have the free movement of goods between the UK, between Northern Ireland and the EU. What we also have is Northern Ireland de facto in the EU customs territory. It's part of that customs territory. It also has unfettered access to the UK market. So essentially the free movement of goods from Northern Ireland into the rest of the UK, into GB. But as I'm sure everybody is aware, because Northern Ireland is in the de facto in the EU customs territory, de facto in the EU's internal market for goods, there are non-tariff barriers on the movement of goods from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. And we see that particularly in the area of, or we see that most evident in the area of agri-food, where the SPS rules apply. Okay, so Northern Ireland occupies a pretty unique position, but one which clearly brings enormous challenges because of the disruption that it is creating in terms of the movement of goods from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. Should also point out that although some people refer to Northern Ireland still being in the internal market, that is misleading because it's not part of the free movement of services, people, or capital. So all our focus at the moment is on what's happening in terms of movement of goods across the Irish Sea. There is a hardening of the border north-south in terms of services, people, and capital. I can pick up on that in questions later. Also, just going down the bottom of this slide, you'll see that although these particular arrangements are in place at the moment, there's no guarantee that all of these arrangements are going to be in place forever, partly because there's a democratic consent mechanism as part of the protocol. Essentially, the arrangements which provide for the free movement of goods between Northern Ireland and the EU, so avoiding a physical hardening of the border north-south, those are up for vote by MLAs, and the first vote is going to take place in 2024. If the MLAs do not give their consent, then these particular arrangements for the round movement of goods will formally at least disappear after two years. In the interim, the UK and the EU will work out what to do, or what they would need to do in order to try and avoid a hardening of the physical hardening of the border north-south. Okay, so we've got that vote on the horizon, and as probably everybody's aware, there's a lot of contestation around the protocol, which we'll come to in a moment. More immediately, however, a lot of the focus is on how the protocol is actually being implemented and what the challenges are around its implementation. We always knew there was going to be difficulties because of the particular regime on the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And it was agreed by the UK and the EU back in December last year that there would be a number of grace periods, notably around the requirement for certificates on the movement of goods, for the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but also the introduction of some prohibitions and restrictions on the movement of meat products, and also then the continued application of the EU's acquis, EU law around medicines. Agreement was reached on creating some grace periods. You see those at the top half of the screen here. What was also agreed introduced by the UK at the end of last year was also a grace period for parcels. Okay. Now, I think it's fair to say that the implementation of the protocol proved far more problematic than the UK government anticipated. And it took the decision in early March to extend unilaterally the grace periods, which were due to come to an end at the end of March. Okay, now you might have said this was a logical thing to do because of the difficulties being faced, but from an EU perspective, it was breaking the obligations that the UK had signed up to in the protocol. So we see the European Commission issuing a letter of formal notice of legal action. Important because it means essentially 3 months into the operation of the protocol, the UK and the EU are in dispute over the implementation of the protocol. Okay. Clearly, that unilateral extension only relates to two of the grace periods, and the other grace periods are to expire at some point in the next before the end of this year. So we've got a grace period on the introduction of prohibitions and restrictions on the movement of meat products coming to an end at the 30th of June. We've also got the extended grace periods, which the UK adopted, coming to an end on the 1st of October, and still the medicines acquis grace period coming to an end on the 31st of December. What this means to say is that although there's been a lot of change in arrangements for trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, there is further change coming later this year as these grace periods end. So we've seen turbulence to date. I think we're going to see more turbulence to come, or at least challenges for business in preparing for the end of these grace periods. Okay, so implementation has proved to be challenging, most challenging in terms of movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, hence and we've seen that there are a lot of checks and controls being introduced on the movement of goods. It's probably the case that Larne, Belfast, Warren Point have never been so busy in terms of their activity to ensure the protocol is implemented. This has obviously been proved disrupting for businesses, but it's also had political implications. We've seen increased opposition to the protocol. We've seen obviously calls for the Irish Sea border to be abandoned. A number of calls for a number of political parties saying that they simply cannot tolerate the idea of an Irish Sea border. We've also seen legal challenges. There's two, at least in the courts at the moment, where opponents of the protocol are seeking judicial review of it, and we get to see the outcome of those. We've obviously also seen the violence in certain communities in Northern Ireland earlier this year. And while there are multiple reasons behind that, clearly one of the arguments being advanced in support of the action was the opposition to the protocol. And we've also seen quite vehement opposition from a good number of politicians to the protocol and these calls for it to be scrapped. Now, despite all this going on, bottom right-hand side, the UK and the EU are very much talking about how you could begin to address some of the challenges around implementation of the protocol. And from a UK government's perspective, a desire to see actually changes to the protocol. Whether those will lead to change remains to be seen, because I think it's fair to say that the UK and the EU have differing perspectives on what's required. And we're yet to see the outcome of those negotiations, those discussions. But the key point here is that those discussions are ongoing. Okay. You may recall back at the beginning of this year, the UK government took the line that actually a lot of the implementation of the protocol, some of the issues around it was essentially just teething problems. And I think it's fair to say, yes, we can referred to a number of the difficulties earlier this year as being such teething problems, essentially because there was a lack of time to prepare. You remember that the transition period wasn't extended last year, and I think everybody thought it was far too short a period. Moreover, the lack of time, the transition period was taking up more with negotiating or trying to renegotiate elements of the protocol rather than really thinking through how it was going to be implemented. I think a lot of people will recall the lack of clarity coming through, particularly from the UK government, about what the protocol would involve. We're all aware of the Prime Minister's statement. There'd be no hard border, there'd be no checks and controls, there'd be no tariff barriers. I think it's fair to say that he was misleading, to put it mildly. Lack of preparedness. New systems were not actually in place in time. They've not actually been tested. Some of the systems came very, very late in the day. And then also, I think it's fair to say that a good number of politicians didn't really understand necessarily what had been agreed and hadn't necessarily been preparing themselves for the implementation. Okay. It'd be naive, however, to argue that the difficulties which we've seen with the protocol's implementation are just teething problems. There are genuine issues out there, which I'm sure many people on this call they'll be familiar with them. I think there is a sense that those are being recognised, and the question is, can they be addressed? So there's big questions at the moment about whether the grace periods can be extended, what can be done within those grace periods to ensure implementation of the protocol, find some mitigations and easements there. I'm sure Stephen will talk through some of what's being discussed. But I think the key point here is that they are being discussed, and that we could see some changes ahead, which may ease the implementation of the protocol. That said, the challenges around the protocol don't end with any agreement reached between the UK and the EU this year on what to do with grace periods, what to do with any easements. And there are further challenges ahead, and these relate to regulatory divergence. We're still at the very early stage of real Brexit, and the UK has yet to really diverge from the EU in many areas. The potential, however, exists for regulatory divergence, changes in UK law, but also changes in applicable EU law, because one of the key issues around the protocol is that Northern Ireland is signed up to changes in applicable EU law and to their adoption. Moreover, it could be that there are new EU laws coming through in due course on the movement of goods, which would be applicable or would be applied to Northern Ireland. Those would only be applied if there's agreement between the UK and the EU. Okay, so big question there is, how is this regulatory divergence going to be managed? And also, how much regulatory divergence is there going to be? Also, we're not too sure about where Northern Ireland's position within some of the UK trade agreements. Various bits of discussion around at the moment about a potential deal with Australia, New Zealand. One argument is that actually the protocol does provide for some protection for Northern Ireland, insofar as Northern Ireland should be able to get access to those trade agreements in terms of exports, but need not necessarily be covered by imports from the third countries under those agreements. The issue here, though, is that there's a lack of clarity around at the moment. I think we'll all be quite keen to see what the terms are for Northern Ireland traders under those agreements. The environment is also going to be affected by the legal actions which are ongoing and the potential outcomes of those. We've obviously got the legal challenges within the UK system to the legality of the protocol. We'll hear about the outcome of those in the coming weeks and months. But we've also got the ongoing action between the UK, between the EU, or by the EU against the UK for non-implementation of the protocol and breaches. And there's obviously going to be outcomes, potential outcomes there, both politically, but also potentially financially for the UK. We don't know what sort of action the EU might take in response. Added to this, we've also got the ongoing political contestation we see very much in Northern Ireland at the moment. And then thinking slightly further ahead, there's the question of, okay, well, what would happen if there is no democratic consent in 2024? It's far too early to say what the outcome of that vote is going to be, But as we know, we've probably got assembly elections, or we should have assembly elections next year, if not before. And the outcome of those elections is likely to determine that vote in 2024, which means to say we're probably going to see continued political contestation around the protocol for the coming year, at least until the assembly elections. Okay. So just next steps, what can we anticipate in the coming weeks and months? I would stress that there's an enormous amount of engagement and dialogue. Engagement with stakeholders to try and identify what the issues are and what some of the potential ways forward are. And there is ongoing dialogue between the UK and the EU on what easements, what mitigations can be introduced. Whether those will be successful or not remains to be seen, because I think it's fair to say both sides, or the two sides, are still some way apart from each other because of their perspectives on what needs to be done. They're moving towards or through a work plan, possibly to a roadmap on implementation. This is the focus of the negotiations at the moment. We should see in the next couple of weeks what the outcome of that is. And that could be some flexibilities around the implementation. There's no certainty at the moment. We could have a situation where there's some degree of regulatory alignment between the UK and the EU, which should ease the checks and controls on the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. From an EU perspective, they reckon that 80% of the checks and controls can be removed if you have regulatory alignment on the part of the UK with the EU. UK, however, for political reasons at least, is opposed to that. Political choices there to be made. What we should also have coming out is some clarification about what the protocol means, because there are differences of opinion here, and there may be some concessions. If there isn't a deal, however, then we've still got the prospect of further unilateral action by the UK, particularly as we get closer to the end of the current grace periods. And then the response to that may actually be legal action or further legal action on the part of the EU. All this means there's a certain amount of uncertainty around the future of the relationship. That said, I think it's fair to say that it's really difficult to see any renegotiation of the protocol itself. The focus very much, despite the rhetoric at times, is formally at least implementation, very strongly from the EU side, but also I think once you sort of go beyond the politics on the UK side, the UK government seems pretty committed to this protocol and its implementation. So I think although there's a lot of narrative around in Northern Ireland at the moment about renegotiating or removing the protocol, I think for the time being at least, we're likely to be with the protocol and its implementation, and the focus of the UK EU discussions at the moment is very much about how you actually make it work. As I said, we should know in the next couple of weeks whether they've reached agreement or not. But very difficult at the moment to really discern what the likely outcome is going to be. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to hand back to Aaron, and happy to take questions at the end.
David, thank you very much for that. That was very informative. I suppose my takeaway is engagement is key. And I think that leads nicely on to Stephen here as well. But with looming regulatory divergence and looming grace periods, what the industry requires is clarification and certainty. And I think that's where we felt very empty in terms of, despite the incredible efforts made by groups such as Stephen's, that a lot of organisations within the industry struggled because things were just dropped there. So engagement would be my key takeaway there from David's thing. We know what's looming, clarification and certainty, and that's where I'm going to pass over to Stephen and just say the great job that Manufacturing NI are doing in that respect, and hopefully he'll share some insights from his latest research. But before I do that, if we all just remember that we'll take questions at the end, and please do use that chat function to type your questions, and we'll deal with those at the end. So Stephen, I'll pass over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aaron, and good morning to you, Hilary, Amanda in the background, and everybody watching in at the moment. David is taking us through the kind of legal negotiating perspective, but I thought it was important this morning just to kind of give a bit of a reminder about what the protocol means for us and some insight into the impact that it's had. So what is these barnacles that Boris talks about needing sanded at the bottom of the boat actually felt like? So I'll take you through some research that we've completed recently, which talks about the impact that the protocol has had and the view of Northern Ireland's manufacturers about what needs to happen next. So just as a reminder, as David said, Northern Irish goods only can freely circulate in the EU's market, but we're subject to a lot of EU rules. We can also have unfettered access back into the rest of the UK's internal market. Northern Ireland remains part of the UK's customs territory, so we take and benefit from the UK's free trade agreements. But the UK effectively is an agent on behalf of the EU in terms of the operation of a customs border on the Irish Sea. That's a very unique set of circumstances, not something that has been largely witnessed anywhere before, but also provides a unique opportunity for Northern Ireland in terms of our ability to trade into those marketplaces. As David said, and this is often misunderstood. Even now, in the last week, I've had manufacturers saying, but we're in the single market. We're not. Northern Ireland is out of the EU alongside the rest of the UK. We're not in the EU single market. What it does mean and what the protocol does do is that our goods are supposed to freely circulate within the EU's market. Now, for manufacturers, there's a certain service element now sitting alongside the actual goods that they make. There still remains challenges there for Northern Irish companies being able to continue to trade as it has done before, prior to the end of the transition period. However, our goods do have a unique opportunity in terms of tariff, quota and rules of origin, and indeed customs-free trade, both into the EU and from the EU and into the UK's GB market. But the cost of that are these controls, taking the rules and the controls on a GB to Northern Ireland direction. So getting the goods to Northern Ireland, well, from an EU to NI direction, for the Republic of Ireland to NI, there's absolutely no change. From the rest of the EU to Northern Ireland via Britain as a land bridge, you need to use what are called transit accompanying documents, which is a smoother way of travelling through that territory. And EU to Northern Ireland, excluding GB, there's no change there at all. Now, from Northern Ireland to GB and to the EU, things are meant to operate as they have done up until the 31st of December this year. So our goods in the UK market, so what does unfettered access actually mean? Well, at this point, it means anything. There just are no controls at all, but there will be a period where what are known as Northern Ireland qualifying goods will be defined, and we expect that there'll be news about that probably over the summer, but with the UK pushing back the implementation of its own border operating model to the 1st of January next year, that timeline may drift a little bit. So it may be the autumn or even the winter of this year before we know what a Northern Ireland qualifying good is. But for now, and probably after that definition is made, it means that there are no export declarations, no summary declarations, no import declarations on arrival into GB, no customs duties to be paid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there are some limited exceptions, and I know there's some people on the call that are moving controlled goods, but that's always been the case, as there has been some, pardon me, some administrative burden for those specific types of control goods, and those remain. But in general, NI to GB, it is as it was on the 31st of December last year, until we get a final definition of what a Northern Ireland qualifying good is. We also have that unfettered access into the EU's market, and just the same as with the UK, there's no checks, controls, or processes, and we continue to trade in paper, at least, continue to trade as we've done up until the 31st of December. As I said, though, we're not part of the EU single market. Our goods can only freely circulate. So there are areas and issues that manufacturers out there just need to be wary of, and checking that they're able to continue to trade in the way that they've done before. Now, what it means for us is that we have to maintain regulatory alignment for all those rules on goods within the EU. So, for instance, goods that we make in Northern Ireland continue to have the CE marking. That, in some respects, isn't much of an issue, because manufacturers who sell with the EU would want to sell to the EU and would have to continue to get this. The good news is for us is that we only need one set of regulatory conformity assessments. So if we have CE marking, the UK is committed that they will accept Northern Irish goods carrying that into the rest of the UK marketplace, whereas competitors in GB have to go through at least 2 regulatory conformance tests in order to make sure they sell their goods to the EU, sell their goods to Northern Ireland, and sell them within the UK as well. So how have things gone so far? Well, it's suffice to say it's been a difficult period. It's kind of come in kind of 3 waves, I would say. The first wave was from the 1st of January in the first number of weeks. Well, how do we continue just to move things from Britain into Northern Ireland? So what are these new systems? They all came so late on that people didn't have any time to understand what they were. As a for instance, lots of manufacturers closed for Christmas on the 18th of December, but the Trader Support Service opened on the 22nd of December. So when manufacturers were closed, some of these systems were only coming online, and people had no opportunity to look at them, to test them, to gather the information that was required. But January was very difficult. People just trying to understand the basic function of moving something from GB into NI. That's been followed up now with a much more complex supplementary. So the second stage of that movement is the completion of supplementary declarations. And that's the point where people are finding the greatest level of friction. And that's the point where people are finding the greatest level of frustration as well. So those people that move goods from GB into NI as components, as raw materials, as finished products, they're having to complete a full frontier declaration in 2 stages. And even if those goods are sold within Northern Ireland or back to GB, and they're not at risk of moving into the EU at all, they're still needing to complete all these processes. And that's causing quite significant distress for people. And that's experienced, that's the stress is reflected in the surveys that we've completed just recently, where 77% have said they've had some or significant impact since the end of the transition period. As a guide, the similar question asked of GB manufacturers was 60%. So we're significantly more impacted. Now, why is that the case? Well, if you're a GB importer and you bring raw materials in from anywhere from the EU after the 1st of January, well, the UK has an open door. It is not introducing its import border until the 1st of January next year, but our import border came into place on the 1st of January this year. So the rest of the UK has still to see what Brexit actually looks like, has still to see what those additional frictions will be. Yes, if you're a Scottish fisherman, if you're a Welsh hill farmer, if you're a GB manufacturer selling into the EU, you will have experienced quite significant friction, and that's been reflected in the UK national news, for instance. But all other businesses, all consumers really don't have and haven't experienced the full impact of what Brexit looks like, and won't do until that import border is put in place. And that import border is already here. So I'd expect these numbers to move around a bit. And in some respects, despite the fact that we're having all this challenge and friction at the moment, we'll have a year's worth of experience by the time the rest of the UK begins to really understand the impact that this will have. In terms of what are the issues for them, when we surveyed in February, about 1 in 4 said that they were struggling with the new processes and they believed that those were likely to persist. Well, hopefully you'd have thought that as time moved on, people would have got to grips with those processes and they would have felt a bit more positive about it. But actually, between February and the beginning of May, more people are finding that those processes are causing them a problem, and those problems will persist. Now, this coincided with the supplementary declaration phase, the second phase of that full frontier declaration that was required. So January was easy in some respects to compared to what's happened since then. Again, equally, about 1 in 4, said that they thought that the processes would likely ease. That's drifted as well. So you get the sense here that people are not, as they understand more, they're finding it more difficult rather than easier. The good news is that around about a third now believe that they're on top of the issues, but a smaller amount than surveyed back in February felt that there was no impact at all. So more people are experiencing problems. More people think that these problems are likely to persist, and more people believe that the impact of the protocol will have a negative impact upon their business. When we ask people about their sales, because our goods are meant to freely circulate in the EU's market and have unfettered access into the rest of the UK market, a third of manufacturers said that they've had a negative impact. So why is that happening? It's largely happening because there's still uncertainty about Northern Ireland's status, not only in the rest of the UK, but certainly within the EU as well. We have many examples of EU member states and their agencies really not understanding that Northern Ireland is different than the rest of the UK. The goods that are made here can be cleared through customs and don't require the full raft of customs declarations, etc., etc., etc. So we have an appeal to the EU as well as the UK to actually do a big campaign to make sure that member states and their agencies and customers there understand that they can continue to buy from Northern Ireland. The biggest challenge we face is the preparedness of GB firms to continue to supply to Northern Ireland. So when we surveyed back in February, just over half had said that their suppliers were unprepared for the new requirements come the 1st of January. We would have hoped, having put in a lot of effort from manufacturers and a lot of effort from HMRC, the Trader Support Service and others, that number would have shifted quite significantly in those 3 months. But it really hasn't. The dial really hasn't moved at all. The single biggest issue remains GB firms getting to grips with what is required to send goods to Northern Ireland. Now, the one figure on this slide, which is most concerning for me, is that when we surveyed back in February, 15% said that GB suppliers were unwilling to send to Northern Ireland. That has drifted now to 20%. So rather, again, than the situation getting better, it appears to be getting significantly worse. Again, from an EU perspective, numbers are not the same, but not dissimilar in many respects. Again, a bit of a drift in terms of GB or EU suppliers being unprepared to send to Northern Ireland. So that's further confirming the need for the EU to get its act together in terms of working with its member states. When we asked the sector what they believed was likely to be the future for them, but a quarter now see there are significant opportunities now or in the future for them. But a third are saying it's been business as usual. But a third are still reporting that they believe that those issues that they're experiencing are likely to persist, and that's going to continue to have some problems for them. So what do they want done about it? It's all very well complaining, but what would they actually like to see happen? Well, the first thing to say is, particularly when we're on a seminar with Cleaver, Fulton, Rankin, this is the law, and manufacturers are wary of that. Business will always operate within the law and will always try to meet their obligations in law, and that remains the case. Nothing's shifted, despite all the difficulties that people have had over the last number of months, and in some cases increasing difficulties. More people just want the protocol to work, and they're appealing with the UK and the EU to agree whatever mitigations and derogations that they can in order to make the protocol work. And here we have a fundamental gap between where the UK and the EU are. The EU are saying, implement the protocol as agreed, and we'll look at further flexibility. The UK is saying, listen, we need further flexibility in order to implement the protocol as agreed. And in between that tug of war is Northern Ireland's businesses and consumers. And we're that rope between the tug of war. And our worry is that we would see the rope stretching to the point of fraying or even potentially breaking. So we need action, and we need action pretty quickly in order to meet the objectives that both the UK and the EU set out in their preamble to the protocol. Again, our manufacturers are asking, listen, send stuff to or make sure that GB businesses are ready for what they want to send to us and what we need to buy from them. There's a big jump in terms of firms asking the EU to make sure that they get their member states and businesses in their member states actually informed. Again, a big jump from a third up to a half, basically saying to the Northern Ireland Executive, listen, this is a unique opportunity for us. For once in a lifetime, we have a competitive advantage here, and we need to use that competitive advantage to our benefit. We need to make sure that all our executive, its departments and agencies actually go out and provide and identify, and provide those opportunities that we have. Certainly our exporters are reporting strong demand from the EU. That's an opportunity for us to go there and make sure that people know that we can still trade with them. But equally, we know that InvestNI have had more than 30 inquiries from across the world, as far away as New Zealand, about Northern Ireland's position and about our position under the protocol, and looking at Northern Ireland as a potential investment location for FDI for manufacturing. And we know that the CSO, the Central Statistics Office in the South, are reporting that sales from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland in the first 3 months of this year have increased by 44%. So business is business. It tries to sort and deal with the problems that it can do. It asks for help and assistance for the problems it can't solve itself. But it also spots an opportunity, and entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, and they want to make sure that the executive grasp the opportunity that's been presented to it. And finally, just as there's lots of commentary, particularly in our political circles, around the protocol should be scrapped, the protocol should be no more, it should be destined for the bin, etc., etc., etc. Well, that's not really the opinion of Northern Ireland's manufacturers. So despite all the issues and problems and concerns, that dial hasn't moved at all since January. Around 1 in 5 say just scrap the protocol. And that's remained consistent through the surveying period. They recognise this is the law. They want to get on with it as business does. And they'd like some help from both governments to make sure that it actually works for us. So in the end, what are we looking for? Well, we've kind of summarised this down into 4 things. We need stability. So David talked earlier about the UK's actions to unilateral actions to extend the grace periods. Well, we need the EU to acquiesce to those. We need to make sure that the EU understand that the UK took those actions for a very solid reason, and they need to ensure that we continue to have the stability in terms of some of those supply chains into Northern Ireland, whether that be for some of our foods or our parcels or whatever. But it's also about stability, is also about settling the politics, particularly this side of the summer. So we need the joint committee that's coming up next month to agree not only to those extensions to the grace periods that the UK has acted upon, but also other areas that will really show and demonstrate that actually problems have been identified and we're trying to sort them. Secondly, we need that certainty, and that's about long-term solutions to some of the problems that have been identified. And manufacturers would understand this. They'll get a new machine or they'll start a new process and they'll work really hard to get to 80% as quickly as they possibly can. And then they'll spend a lot of time studying and trying to get that other 20% to work as efficiently as possible for them. So we need some of that. We've identified where the issues, where the friction and where the problems are, particularly around SPS, particularly around what are known as at-risk goods. So we need that certainty in the long term so that those FDI investors, but also our own local investors, will put the money in and actually create the wealth and work that we want. The third area is simplicity. It is a nonsense to suggest that we have to do a full frontier declaration for goods that are staying in Northern Ireland or going back to GB. They're at no risk of entering into the EU. There is a simplified way in which we can do this, and we need to make sure that the protocol has as minimal impact on business and civic life in Northern Ireland as we can. So there is a big demand to ensure that simplicity is delivered. And then finally, it's affordability. Northern Ireland shouldn't be asked to pick up the financial cost of the UK's Brexit. The reality is that these costs and frictions these frictions and complexities, come at a cost. Some of those costs are pure Brexit costs, and we have to accept those. It's a decision that the UK has taken to Brexit, and those will be experienced here and the GB. But some of those costs are specifically protocol costs, and we need to make sure that the businesses here continue to have a competitive position once they can take to market to ensure that our goods are enjoyed here at home, across in GB, and across the rest of the world. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks very much, Stephen, for that. Again, a very interesting overview and some great insights, and great to see the research directly from those on this call and from the industry generally. I don't think I can sum up yours better than those 4 words, Stephen, on it. But I suppose my key takeaways, especially from the feedback that I get directly from my clients, is along the lines of that whatever mitigations are required are key, as things loom and uncertainty at present, and that the executive, and this is your line, Stephen, just taken away, the executive must identify and must provide and assist to provide the opportunities that exist to work through this. We're all in an awful position, or a difficult position. You're right, business is agile and business is adaptable, and we have to adapt and move on. So thanks very much for that. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Hilary, who is going to provide an insight into how we've been assisting clients and what she foresees are some areas to look at. So thanks very much, Stephen, and I'll pass over to Hilary now.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. And can I just join Aaron in thanking David and Stephen for their time this morning, which I'm sure everyone on the call feels the same. Has been really informative. I mean, I just want to sum up with some conclusions of some of the themes, I suppose, coming out of both of those talks. And I think, Stephen has outlined the challenges facing the manufacturing sector, and we don't want to minimise those in any way. But as David explained, I think the protocol is here to stay for the time being. So what do we do, and what have we been doing to try and help clients navigate through this period of uncertainty? So first issue, I suppose, coming out of that clearly is supply chain review. And I think it's clear from this morning that many of you have seen disruption in your supply chain, whether that be through increased expenditure on raw materials, or what seems to be a big issue is that GB suppliers in particular are unprepared for the changes or just refusing to supply on the same terms. So it goes without saying, I suppose, that from a legal point of view, now is the time to review your contracts. You'll be looking at key contract terms under consideration, or those relating to things like delivery, price and payment, change control, termination, and law and jurisdiction. The good starting point is those contracts with your GB suppliers. What do they say in terms of location of delivery? Who's responsible for delivery? Who's responsible for the customs clearances, which has obviously become a big issue. Now may be the time to consider using Incoterms, which is the international commercial terms, a set of internationally recognised terms for commercial contracts. Many of you maybe already are. If so, maybe it's time to look at renegotiating some of those terms. So the Incoterms will cover things such as who's responsible for loading and unloading goods, when and where delivery takes place, when risk passes, and also who's responsible for the export-import clearance and duties. From a Northern Ireland buyer's perspective, DDP, which is delivered duty paid, a term you'll probably be familiar with, that's obviously the most advantageous, places the maximum obligation on the GB supplier. It means that the supplier is responsible for arranging carriage and delivery of goods. I can sort of hear some of you already saying, but that's not where you're at in terms of bargaining position with your GB suppliers. And quite often you are forced to accept more supplier-friendly terms like Ex Works or something similar, which means that you're responsible for customs clearances and procedures, etc. So I recognise the commercial reality there, but it is worth opening up those types of conversations with your suppliers, and you probably already have, It also, just to clarify, there is the Trader Support Service, which is David mentioned earlier, which is the UK government free service available to help traders, regardless of size, move their goods between GB and NI. It can give you advice and support, but also help with actually making the customs declarations that you have to make. One point is important to bear in mind that the Incoterms does not cover all provisions that you'll need to look at. So, for instance, product liability for breach of contract, governing law and jurisdiction, and in some cases, even title to goods and payment terms won't be covered there. So it's important to look at your terms as a whole, separately to the Incoterms. I'm sure many of you have already begun to do that or even finished that process, but I suppose just a word to those who haven't, don't ignore your contracts. Now is the time to maybe even step back from the detail and look strategically at those contracts, assess where your weaknesses are in the supply chain, and maybe is there potential to change your emphasis geographically, and ultimately use any opportunity you have to take back control. Making your business more resilient in the face of a high degree of uncertainty. Obviously, one area that has seen a lot of major focus is on distribution, and you may need also to consider, developing new approaches to the new transport and logistic processes. So, second point, we've heard it mentioned a few times this morning, regulatory or legislative alignment. It's a massive topic, and it's not something we can cover in any detail really this morning, but I've picked out a couple of areas which I think are areas which would be of interest to the sector. So the whole idea of employment and skills. And I suppose for a bit of good news from an employment law perspective, very little will change in the short term. A lot of our employment legislation in Northern Ireland is derived from EU law, and there are no immediate plans to make any radical changes which would impact the manufacturing industry. But in time, we may see elements of that changing, and for instance, to the working time legislation, which hasn't been popular, or to particular aspects of legislation. But probably the most significant impact of Brexit and the protocol from an environmental an employment landscape is in relation to the right to work. So businesses do need to look at how they currently employ their staff, and do they rely heavily on EU nationals, or even does a member of your supply chain, a key member of your supply chain, rely heavily on EU nationals? And obviously the relevant scheme there is the EU settlement scheme. And the main deadline looming there, which I'm sure everyone is already aware of, is the 30th of June deadline for application to this, or registration to the scheme for EU, EEA and Swiss nationals. So as long as an individual has started living in the UK by 31 December 2020, they will be eligible to make an application to the scheme. And if the Home Office is satisfied, the applicant will be granted either settled or pre-settled status under the scheme. So, if you as an employer cannot provide proof of admission to the scheme after 30th of June, you won't be able to satisfy the right to work checks. And so that will cause all sorts of issues for you. So just a reminder to be mindful of that date. In terms of data protection, which again is something I think probably applies to a lot of businesses, there has been a flurry of activity in the data protection landscape over the last year, not only as a result of Brexit, but also as a result of the decision in the Schrems case, which undermined the legitimacy of data transfers to the US. But as we're focusing on Brexit specifically, the UK is now operating under its own data regime, the Data Protection Act 2018, and UK GDPR is still waiting on formal confirmation from the EU that it will be granted adequacy, i.e. that it's found to give an adequate level of protection to that in force in the EU, so that data can be freely transferred. The signs are very good. We have a draft adequacy decision from the EU Commission, which means now that the UK just needs formal approval from the member states. So it is worth keeping an eye on that one, particularly if you're trading across the EU. one point, just because which is kind of got lost in all of the focus on adequacy. One of the key obligations of GDPR is the requirement under Article 27 that companies which are not established in the EEA but who do, process personal data within the EEA must appoint an EEA-based representative. So that's just something to bear in mind. I'm sure you've are aware of that already and have made steps to comply with that, but it's just to flag that one. Third issue is around business structure and governance. And, we've seen a lot of businesses in the last couple of years now reviewing their operations, both to maximise capability and capacity. And I presume at this point, many of you have conducted an audit of those business processes just to help you understand the implications of the protocol and what support you might need to address the additional burdens on you from a customs and regulatory perspective. In relation to business structures generally, we've also seen many firms looking at their group structure and perhaps thinking of carrying out some form of reorganisation, whether that is a restructure to protect and shield non-trading assets from trading volatility brought on by actually both in the context of the pandemic and Brexit specifically, or the decision by companies and groups to incorporate or establish branches or other presence in ROI or GB. That kind of scrutiny of structures, we and sort of looking at strategic direction, we see that continuing. And for those family-owned businesses among you, there probably will be inevitably, I think, an increased focus on succession planning and exit strategy as you look at what lies ahead and trying to get some degree of certainty of where your business is going. Fourth point is around increased collaboration and M&A. And I mean, again, I think Stephen referred to collaboration being key as we go forward. And, we do see that as one of the opportunities in the next few years. It would be great to see more collaborative working. I mean, one, obviously, as Stephen has highlighted, more collaboration between government and industry. So, a better integration of policies on skills and innovation and finance. And also bringing together support mechanisms for new technologies and allowing manufacturing firms to take advantage of those. But it's probably wider than just government and industry collaboration. We've probably seen a bit more, even in the last year, of collaboration between even industry partners themselves and the industry coming together, I suppose, in a way to have its voice heard and for lobbying purposes. But even wider than that, I think we've seen where there are gaps in markets or gaps in products or particular issues relating to particular branches of the sector where industry partners are coming together, maybe even with the academic sector, to try and create solutions for those problems locally, and to collaborate and to use their collective strength to see a way forward. We do predict probably more M&A activity due to inevitable consolidation in the aftermath of both Brexit and the pandemic. And also Stephen has referred to, and you'll have read from Invest NI about interest in Northern Ireland as an FDI location, obviously given its unique position that we have ended up with here. So hopefully we will see more FDI activity in manufacturing as well in the months and years ahead. And then the last one is about innovation. And again, I think it was a specific question on Stephen's survey, because there's no doubt that digitalization and innovation should be high on the agenda. There'd be obviously significant leaps in technology and AI and robotics, and it's on the increase. So I suppose now is the time to look at automation and streamlining of business functions, which can help you increase efficiency and also cut your business costs. One area probably to particularly focus on would be the green agenda. And I know, the manufacturing sector is probably, has been accused of contributing the most to climate change and maybe environmental deterioration, but actually a lot of experts think that it's the sector that can also stand to benefit greatly from shifting towards more environmentally friendly practices. So, companies are working towards reducing, their environmental impact as well as their carbon emissions, by listening to their customer demands. But it goes wider than that. It's also finding, new innovative solutions that can help drive, sustainable development in the future. And we see there's a lot of funding initiatives and support for those types of green investment schemes. So there's no doubt that, companies should now be looking at their current business and seeing whether there's any form of, green initiative they can implement alongside what they're doing for the purposes of both cutting costs, but also in response to consumer demand as well. So I think that's probably me, a quick whistle stop tour, but I don't want to keep you back from the speakers who, and I know you'll probably have a lot of questions for. So I'll hand back to Aaron, who's going to just look after the M&A or the Q&A session.
Thanks for that.
M&A in the brain, sorry.
M&A in the brain. Yeah. That was, I suppose, a very interesting overview and a good summary, really, of the avenues of investigation that we're seeing as a team. From the legal perspective of the manufacturing clients coming in and consulting on certain points. There are some good questions coming in here following on for Stephen and for David. And I'll just pick a few of these. I think it's fair to say that the frustrations that we feel and bear in the survey are coming through on the chat as well. And that's a consistent message there, especially on the supplier chain and GB supplier chain. And it's important to acknowledge that. But Stephen and David, hopefully you can feed into this as well, maybe from a political perspective if possible. But one good question that I see here, and I think it bears out of Stephen's discussion, is what can NI-PLC do to give clarity to GB and EU in respect of NI status?
Thanks, Aaron. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, the frustrations are clear, and it's reflected in the survey that I presented earlier as well. And that survey also directs us to the interventions that are required. So I mentioned one there in terms of the definition of what is at risk. So the nature of the agreement that the UK and EU made is that commercial processors, so effectively most of manufacturing, have to go through this process, even if they do not supply into the EU. And that's a nonsense, frankly. So one of the first things we're doing is actually trying to get HMRC to have the most expansive definition of not at risk that is possible. Now, being tax authorities, they're very careful. Their job is to try to spot the crooks and the criminals, the people who are trying to avoid the requirements and to defraud the taxpayer. And that's fine for that piece of work that they do, but this is different. So that's the first thing we're trying to do, is to try to get them to agree the most expansive definition of what is at risk. And that includes that kind of 50,000 or less, or 500,000 or less turnover. The second thing is that lots of the arguments from the EU is we'll just have an EU supply chain for things. That's neither practical or indeed possible for many. And I have members, for instance, who buy EU goods made in EU factories. They have to arrive in GB for modification for GB and UK rules. But because the origin doesn't change, there hasn't been sufficient processing at that point, then that EU product actually comes to Northern Ireland potentially with a tariff applied. Well, definitely with a tariff applied in this case, but there will be a means to get that tariff reimbursed. But that's a nonsense as well. So it's a bit like, but come back to the comment I made earlier, is that manufacturers are used to getting to 80% as quickly as they can. Well, on the protocol, we've got to 80% in terms of delivery as quickly as we can. But the other 20% is where the real work takes place and the real effort has to be put in. And that's the bit that we're focused on at the minute with both the UK government in terms of their most expansive definition, but also the EU in terms of the work that they need to get doing. We're talking to the EU directly. The business community is also talking directly to EU member states. So we met with Simon Coveney on Monday. We've met the Germans, the Dutch, the Belgians. We met the Finnish. We've met the Polish, etc., etc., etc. And we're saying to them, listen, this shouldn't be our job. The EU should have told you that you can continue to trade with us, but that's not been borne out consistently. So there's work to be done there. And if we get to that point where the ambitions as laid out at the beginning of the protocol are being delivered, then we have an opportunity at that point. But we've a fair distance to travel to get there, Aaron, no doubt about it.
Yeah. David, I don't know whether you have anything to feed into that one.
I think a key challenge is trying to get politicians to move beyond the contestation around the protocol. You can continue the contestation, you can continue to oppose it, but for the moment at least, the protocol is here. And I'd actually say for the medium to long term, it is here. And that I think NIPLC could really do with the executive, for example, rowing in behind the sort of messages which Stephen was highlighting there, because it would bring a bit more political weight to the Northern Ireland voice, which has been lacking.
Thank you. It's probably time just for one more question here. Stephen, it's picking up on a point that you made about Northern Irish manufacturers being 1 year ahead because of the drop date of 1 January 2021 as opposed to the UK trade drop date. And the question is framed on the basis of how can NI manufacturers monopolise on being that 1 year ahead? What are the opportunities arising out of that? What would initially perceived to be a negative, being it forced upon 1 year early?
I'm not necessarily saying that this is a positive, because when you're experiencing if you have a toothache for a year, going to the dentist a year and 1 day later, you still have a year's worth of toothache to be dealing with. So what I do know, and I'm engaged with Make UK, Scottish Engineering, and a raft of other UK manufacturing bodies, there's zero work going on within many firms, and certainly not within government, to prepare GB firms for the import controls that are coming their way. The stuff that we've been feeling and witnessing, and the friction that we've been experiencing, they're just not getting it, and they're wasting a year. Now, maybe they think things are going to be okay, etc., etc. But many other firms here thought that as well. And in previous surveys, we discovered that it actually, for many manufacturers, it didn't matter if they made a lot of preparation or not. All this stuff came so late with no detail and no time to prepare that it meant it was nothing but pain, whether you spent a load of money or not to get ready. Now, there were examples of firms that had it absolutely nailed on, absolutely. But the general view was that, preparation or not, because you didn't have the detail, you didn't know actually what to really prepare for. And that's where GB firms are sitting. So there will be really large disruption for them come the 1st of January next year. At that point, you would hope that, at least having had the experience of this year, and we've managed to resolve some of the issues, some of the problems, some of the concerns, or people just getting used to the processes, that we will be more efficient at working through those issues. But there's no doubt about it. I mean, Brexit brings issues, brings problems. Otherwise, and brings change. Otherwise, why do it at all? So there was a fundamental change was required by the UK population. The UK's delivered on that, and we're getting change. It's not business as usual, and I'm worried that a lot of our colleagues in GB just don't understand what's coming towards them.
Thanks, Stephen. I think that's about all we have time for. The frustrations are borne out in the session. I think it's clear, and are continuing to be borne out on the chat. And there is, I think, Stephen, to steal one of your lines again, there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done. A lot more consultation as well. So thanks everyone for the questions. If we didn't get to your question, or if you require any further advice or assistance on anything covered today, please do email me at a.moore@cfrlaw.co.uk. To conclude, on behalf of Cleaver, Fulton, Rankin, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. A special thanks to David, Stephen and Hilary, our speakers, and also a special thanks to Amanda in the background, who you can't see, who's helped put this together today. I hope you found it a useful exercise. The information delivered has certainly been heavy and detailed, but certainly very interesting and very useful. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your Friday and the bank holiday weekend. Thanks, Nick.